Hi, everybody. So this is your asynchronous lecture or lab recording for lab 6, which is all about learning. And we're going to be learning about chi-square tests. Um, so this is an overview. What you have to do asynchronously this week is you have a pre-lab activity that I want you to do called the maze learning experiment. It's due this Thursday. Um, I just sent you all an email about it. I think I wrote Thursday 10/9. I meant Thursday 10/8. Um, but yeah, just check that email that I sent out. It's pretty easy. It takes like 5 minutes. If you can't do it, just let me know. So we're also going to be talking about the chi-square goodness of fit, and we're going to be showing you like how to do it. And the same thing with the chi-square test of independence. Going to tell you what it is and how to do it. And then, as always, we're going to do the worksheet in person together, so you can ask me if you have any questions. So just before lab, just go to Blackboard and download the mazes data save file. It's a sample from like a different school and a different class because we're not going to get the data in time for everybody to do it, but we just want you to do the experiments that you know what it involves. That way, when you look at the data, it won't seem so foreign to you. Also before lab, which is not written here, just, the usual stuff like watch this lecture and other things, which I guess you already know that if you're watching this lecture. Moving on. So a little bit about the maze activity. So it's an experiment that Edward Thorndike, who's a famous researcher, used to do with a cat in a series of boxes to study the law of effect. So usually this method of problem solving is studied by using rats in mazes. It's all about trial and error learning, which is like a fundamental way in which humans and animals solve problems. So in humans, it can be studied by giving students a task that's analogous to that faced by white rats in mazes. So historically, students have participated in this learning task by tracing a maze with their finger when they're blindfolded. But this current study is a computer-based analog to those maze learning tasks. So the task is to navigate through the maze. Participants are provided with straight ahead view from their current position. And the view shows the open doors or paths that they can choose. And you use like the little directional arrows to choose your path. You'll figure it out as you're going. So this is how to access the experiment for the maze experiment. It's also how you're going to access the be a juror experiment that I sent out to you via that email. Super easy. It's literally just those 4 steps. I doubt any of you have an account. So create an account. Don't try to log in because unless you know you have an APA account, which I didn't have one. So I doubt that you guys do. So you just enter it in, you choose experiment, and then you like enter in that class ID. Oh, shoot. You do not have to submit a screenshot of the completion page to Blackboard. Please don't. So don't email me and be like, hey, I can't submit a screenshot. There's nowhere to submit it. That's good. Please don't submit it. Honor system, Scouts honor, just do the experiment. If you don't, no one will know, but you'll know. So, let your conscience eat at you. Okay. We'll discuss the data more at length in lab on Tuesday after learning about the chi-square test. So what is a chi-square test? Full disclosure, the chi-square test is not something that you're going to use very often, but we're learning about it anyways. So the chi-square test compares proportions instead of means between 2 or more groups. So for the t-test and the ANOVA, which we learned, it was all about comparing the means of 2 groups. But for the chi-square test, it's comparing like the actual count of like certain groups. So example is, does ethnicity differ across different academic majors? So is the proportion of ethnicities between psych and business majors different? Like, yeah, it should be straightforward. So you use a chi-square test when your grouping variables are categorical or binary. So categorical being like ethnicity, gender, age group, binary being like yes, no. So age, weight, and height, which are often continuous, is not something we would use for a chi-square, although, as we've talked about in lab before, our current, I just skipped the slide, sorry. Our current data set that we've been using are like intro survey data set. The age is categorical. So always keep in mind how the data is being asked and how it's categorized. Yeah, so these variables should have 2 or more groups. So like if I don't know why there would be a variable that just says yes, but if you have a variable that just says yes and doesn't have another option, that wouldn't work, because what are you comparing it to, right? You got to have at least 2 choices. So the first chi-square that we're going to talk about is, maybe it's pronounced chi-square. I don't think so. Pretty sure it's chi. Someone pronounced chi and it made me think of the T. Well, anyways, so the chi-square goodness of fit test. So it's where you have one categorical variable with 2 plus groups. So for this scenario, you're not comparing like, psych majors to econ majors. You just want to see if like the expected ethnicity or sex or age in a certain group is comparable to like what you expected to see or what's seen in like commonplace society. So you want to determine whether the distribution of participants in a single variable follows a known or hypothesized distribution. So what that means is, let's say that the reason why students in our data set chose to take foundations class. Now, we didn't actually ask this question, but if we did, and the options were, it's a program requirement, they wanted to do it for personal interest, or it was an advisor recommendation, we might think, okay, probably 50% of the students take it as a requirement, 20% take it for personal interest, 30% take it by recommendation. So our hypothesis, our null hypothesis, is that we think 50%, 0.5 people take it because they have to, 0.2, 20% take it because they want to, and 0.3, 30% take it because their advisor says they should. So that's our null. So I've always said that our null is that the mean that we have isn't different from the mean, or isn't like the means aren't different. That's usually what our null is that the means aren't different. This looks different than our usual nulls, but it's actually the same. So like we think that our distribution, the number of people that are taking this class, the percentage of people, does not differ than the mean that we are expecting. I hope that makes sense. I can talk more about this in person. So the alternative hypothesis is that the means are different. So like we do, like there ends up being a difference in between those. So chi-square goodness of fit. This is how you run it. I'm just going to pause here for a second. You go to analyze non-parametric tests, legacy dialogues, chi-square. They really bury it deep in there because not a lot of people are using it. So you would want to select the reason variable from the variables list. Oh, sorry. So this is just like a made up data set. So you would want to choose the thing that you're testing. So like this, the thing that we're testing is the reason why people are taking this class. So you would want to choose like your variable that you want to test, and you put in the test variable list as the name implies. And now you have 2 choices down here for expected values, and this all involves our null hypothesis. So these are the 2 ways that you would use a chi-square goodness of fit. One is the value section, where you want to compare values. So you want to compare like, oh, like I think 50% of people are taking it because they have to, 20% because they want to, 30% because of their advisor. So you want to type in your proportions, so decimals, and you have to type them in as the same order as they were labeled in the data. So if our reason variable is like 1, they have to, 2, they want to, 3, their advisor told them to, you want to enter the proportions in that same way. The other example, which we're not going to talk about right now, is the all categories are equal button. So that's like saying like, oh, I think that 33% of people taking it because they have to, 33 because they want to, 33 because their advisor told them to. And if you choose that one, that just means that your null hypothesis is different. That just means that you think like mean 1 equals mean 2 equals mean 3, instead of like mean 1 equals 0.5, mean 2 equals 0.2, mean 3 equals 0.3. Again, very complicated. We can talk about it more in person, or you can use Perusal to ask questions on here. So this is the output you get from a chi-square goodness of fit test. So you're going to get the observed n, which is like the number of people in that category that your data shows, and then the expected n, which is the numbers that you put in. So if you put 0.5 and we have 100 people in this data set, then that would mean that 50 people, you would expect 50 people to be doing it from program requirement. Now, we just made up these numbers arbitrarily. However, when most people do this, they do it based off of like other data or like normative data. So like if we're doing like a racial breakup in like across, I don't know, this like who's taking a psych stats class, if we want to know like the racial breakup, and we have like a whole bunch of statistics from like national statistics, like, oh, the average racial breakdown of a US psych stats course is like 30% this, 20% this, 10% this, then like that's what we would use. Like you don't just enter numbers in arbitrarily. You would want to use numbers that you think or that have been shown to use. Because the reason why you do this is because you want to see if your data is similar to data that's already out there. So the other part of the output that you get is the chi-square value, and then your degrees of freedom, and then you get your significance value, so your p value. So same thing as before, if your p value is less than 0.05, you reject the null. If your p value is greater than 0.05, you retain the null. So we are retaining it, and just as a reminder, our null hypothesis was that I'm gonna go back to it so that we can see it. Requirement equals 0.5, interest equals 0.2, advisor equals 0.3. So that's what we thought, that was the null. So it turns out that that null is correct. We retain it. Don't worry about the no small expected frequencies assumption thing. So this is how we would write it up. A chi-square goodness of fit test was conducted to determine whether 50% of students take statistics as a program requirement, 20% out of personal interest, and 30% due to advisor recommendation at alpha equals 0.05. This test was not statistically significant. And then you put this little chi-square thing, just like a giant italicized X. There's an actual symbol for it, not worth finding in Microsoft Word. It's buried. And then you put your degree of freedom and your n value in there. That this is the difference with a chi-square test. Actually, I think this is stylistic. I was not taught to put the n equals 100 in there, but you definitely can. I know you can. But you could also just say n equals 100 comma chi-square parentheses 2 equals, you know, like that. Great. Again, we're going to do examples of this in class. This is just a preface. So the last chi-square test, the second one and last one, is the chi-square test of independence. So this is if you want to compare two categorical variables to each other, as opposed to comparing one categorical example to like the expected, which was the goodness of fit. So this chi-square test of independence is used to determine whether there's a significant relationship between two variables. So whether knowing the values of one variable will help you predict the values of another. So does regular coffee consumption differ between academic majors? Our null hypothesis would be different academic majors don't show differences in coffee consumption. Our alternative is different academic majors do show differences in consumption. So if we find a p-value less than 0.05, it means that different academic majors will show differences in coffee consumption. This one's a little easier to understand than the goodness of fit. It's pretty similar to the other tests we've done. So to run a chi-square test of independence, you go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and then Crosstabs, which we have not yet been in. Now in here, the reason for that is because of the way that chi-square is calculated by hand. But we're definitely not doing that, so don't worry about it. So for this, your rows would be, there's no really like independent variable versus dependent variable on a chi-square test, because, you know, I guess coffee would be the dependent variable, but It doesn't too much matter where you put them. But for now, let's just say you put your dependent variable in rows. So coffee is you think that the coffee consumption changes based on major. So major would be independent. So rows is dependent, columns is independent. And then we want to go to the statistics and cells tabs before clicking OK. So in the statistics or in the cells tab, which you're going to go to first, you want to fill it in exactly as it is here. Which we'll go over why. A lot of it just kind of like shows you like different things in your output, but it's all important to know. But really the most important part is the statistics. You want to select chi-square as your statistic because we have to report it for APA. So just like save this slide if you ever need to run a chi-square so that you know what to select. So this is the SPSS output. It looks annoying. It's not though. So basically, it's just giving you your count. So the number of students that actually answered this. So like 19 people answered, oh, keep clicking by accident. 19 psychology majors, don't regularly drink coffee, 10 do, and so on and so forth. This expected count is what the chi-square analysis like calculates what your expected count is based on what your actual count is. It's really complicated. It's not worth going into, but basically it's comparing, just like the goodness of fit test, count to expected count. Now the important part is the results. So the chi-square test table gives us the observed chi-squares test statistics, degrees of freedom, and p-value. So Pearson chi-square is the statistic that we're talking about. So the test also shows, it also discusses, violating the minimum expected frequency assumption. Too complicated for this class. Don't worry about it. So what we want to pay attention to is right here, our Pearson chi-square value, our degrees of freedom, and our significance. So our significance is 0.654. It's greater than 0.05, which means that we cannot reject the null. We have to retain the null hypothesis, which we'll talk about here. So that means that a chi-square test of independence was performed to examine the relationship between regular coffee consumption and academic major. The relationship between these variables was not significant because our p-value is 0.65. So that means that there is no relationship between your major and how much coffee you drink. Anecdotally, I beg to differ. I feel like there are some majors that are drinking a lot more coffee. I see those comp sci people pulling like all-nighters, but according to this data, it's not true. So again, you would report it like this, chi-square, 4 comma n value, or you could put the n value out here. 4 is your degrees of freedom, and then it equals the chi-squares test statistic, 0.245, and then you put your p-value. So like I said at the beginning, chi-square, pretty confusing. You don't use it often, but we're going to be using it this week in lab. So I'll go over it more in depth. If you have any questions, just comment them on perusal, please. That way I can answer them and hit upon them. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that everybody knows the material super well. Which, no offense, I kind of doubt because you're learning it for the first time. So that's the whole point, so that we can learn. Great. So again, as a reminder, before we meet in person on Tuesday, the 13th, I think is the date, please just do that maze experiment and the be a juror experiment, which is in the email that I sent you on the day that I'm recording this, which is October 5th. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon. Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to stop recording this. Okay, goodbye.